It's clear that Claude is the leading tool for finance professionals, but learning the tool while trying to keep up with its latest updates can be a bit overwhelming. And also, most beginner tutorials are focused on the general user, which is not what we are. So in this video, I'm going to give you a beginner tutorial on what and how to use Claude for finance professionals. Full system, starting with the desktop, workspace, the pricing, and the core models, so chat, code, and Cowork. And then moving into how to build structured workflows using projects, schedule, tasks, connectors, plugins, skills, and Claude in Excel without you having to sit through 40 minutes of someone explaining the chat box and the pricing page, only to end up with no idea how to use any of this in your actual finance work. Now, if you want all the prompts I'll be showing you in the data sets from this video, well, they're in my community, which is linked in the description below. Now, let's get into it. Claude Desktop. So I'm using the Claude Desktop app for this video because the desktop version is built for real working sessions, file interactions, and structured workflows, which is really what finance work looks like. Now, the browser version works fine for quick questions, but once you're dealing with files, repeated tasks, continuous workflows, you really need the desktop version. Now, in the center of the screen, there's one large input box, and that's where everything starts. So whether you're asking a question or you're uploading a financial statement or you're starting a longer task, this is the single point that you work from. Now, inside this input area, there are small icons for attaching files, for connecting external systems and adding skills, but you do not need to worry about those just yet, but we'll get to each one. On the left sidebar is your navigation. At the top, there is a button to start a new chat, and below that you see projects, artifacts, and customize, which are different parts of the workspace that I'll walk you through one by one. And at the very bottom, you see your recent activity. Now, everything you worked on stays here so that you can come back to a previous task and continue from where you left off whenever you like. Now, before we go into each individual part and how it works, there is just one thing we need to get out of the way first, and that is pricing. Claude has 5 plans, and most of the breakdown online is pretty generic, so I'll give you the finance specific take. Now, the free plan is for testing. You can ask questions, you can do some light analysis, but the limits are tight. So for real finance work, where you're running multiple analyses every day, then this is just not going to hold up. The pro plan at $20 a month is where most finance professionals should start. You get higher usage, access to better models, and you can work with larger data sets, which is the minimum for things like variance analysis or modeling. The max plan is what I personally use because I'm running multiple workflows throughout the day. So if you're using Claude as a daily working tool the way I am, and the way I'm showing you here, max gives you the capacity to actually do that without any limits. Now, the team plan is for finance teams that want to share projects and collaborate inside Claude. And the enterprise plan is for larger organizations that need security controls, audit logs, and lots of integration. So if your company handles confidential financial data, then this is where compliance and governance is covered properly. And my recommendation is to start with Pro to learn what Claude can actually do for your work, then upgrade to Max once you're running things daily. Now, most of what I will show you today runs on Pro. Now, once you have that sorted, the next thing to figure out is where you actually do your work, because Claude gives you 3 different places to do it: chat, code, and Cowork. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see 3 icons, and those are chat, code, and Cowork. Now, they are the 3 options you choose from for any finance work, and the one you pick depends on what you're trying to do. So starting with chat, this is where you go for any quick finance task, like reviewing a single file or asking a question or running a small piece of analysis. Now, a common mistake when starting out is uploading a file and typing something like analyze this. That gives you a generic response that does not hold up under any real review. The fix is to give Claude structure before you give it data. So here's what I do. I click the plus icon in the chat box, I attach an Excel file, and then I write a prompt that defines my role, the task, and exactly what I want back. Now, once I hit enter, Claude reads the file properly, it validates the structure, and then it calculates the metrics. It identifies that revenue is growing month over month while expenses are scaling faster. It flags the loss-making even trend, and it produces a structured executive summary. Now the numbers tie back to the underlying data, and the analysis follows the same logic that a senior analyst would apply. Now the difference between that and the generic response you would have gotten is entirely how the prompt is structured. So that covers chat. The next icon is Cowork, but we'll get to that in a minute because that is our main focus today. Let me quickly walk through code first. Now, where chat and Cowork are designed for interaction and structured workflows, code lets Claude work directly with your system environment to run scripts and build repeatable logic that operates without any manual involvement. Now, for a typical finance professional, this is not something that you need for day-to-day tasks like reviewing reports or doing quick analysis. Most of that is handled in chat or in Cowork. But once your work scales beyond manual handling, code becomes pretty important. So for example, if you receive large data sets every week that need cleaning before analysis, or you have recurring reports that require the same transformations every single time, instead of repeating those steps manually, code lets you define the logic once and then run it automatically. Now, the other place this matters is reliability, because small inconsistencies in how data gets handled compound over time, and putting a layer of code underneath your reconciliations or your reporting pipelines is what you do to remove that risk. You do not need to do this on day one though, but it is worth knowing what it does for your work when you get to that level. So this brings us back to the middle icon, which is Cowork. And this is the one that really matters the most for us. The reason is that finance work is very rarely a single question with a single answer. You are usually working through a process that has multiple files, multiple steps, and a structured output. And Cowork is built for exactly that kind of setup. So when I click New Task, it opens a clean session where I can connect data sources, I can select a project folder, I can attach files, I can add skills, and I can configure how Claude should operate. Now, each task is a separate workflow. So the files I'm working with for a reconciliation do not get mixed with the files that I'm using for forecasting. And that separation is actually more important than it initially sounds, because finance work has natural boundaries and your tool needs to respect those boundaries. So right now, if you used Cowork the way I just described, you would be running a single task and you'd be walking away with an output. Now that works, but it is not where Claude really excels or levels up. Now the features I'm about to show you are what take Cowork one step ahead. Projects. Let's start with projects. Now, a project is a dedicated working environment where your data, your instructions, and your conversations all live in one single place. So instead of starting from scratch every time, Claude builds context inside the project and applies it across all the tasks that you run there. So for finance workflows that repeat, like say a monthly close, regular reporting, or a reconciliation process, this is the most important feature in Claude. So to create one, I click Start from Scratch. I name it Real Estate Portfolio Close and Analysis. And in the instructions box, I paste the standing rules for this project. So I tell Claude to act as a real estate finance analyst, to follow the uploaded MD instruction file strictly, to ensure outputs are structured for management reporting, and to never assume missing data. Then I upload an MD file that defines the workflow, how to calculate portfolio metrics, how to identify variances and what the final output should look like. Then I choose project location and I connect it to the real_estate_finance_demo folder where all my data sets live. So now, when I open the project and I run a single prompt asking for a portfolio level summary, Claude does not need anything else from me. It already has the folder, it has the instructions, and it has all the rules. So it just validates the data, calculates portfolio metrics, it compares property level performances, identifies trends and risks, it flags data gaps explicitly instead of just guessing, and it produces a full management ready report. And that is the difference between using Claude as a tool and using Claude as a working environment. Now, once I have the project set up, I don't want to keep coming back to it every Monday to start it, and make it a manual process that has to be repeated every time. So that's where scheduled tasks come in handy. Scheduled tasks. I click new task inside scheduled. I name it monthly real estate portfolio review, and then I write a description telling Claude to analyze the latest portfolio data and generate a structured report. Now the instructions point to the same project that we just built. So Claude already has the rules and the folder. And I select work in a project, choose the real estate project, set the frequency to weekly running every Monday at 9 a.m. and then I just click save. So from this point on, every Monday morning, Claude opens the project. It runs the same structured analysis and it produces the same management ready output without me starting anything. So when I drop new data into the folder, the next schedule run picks it up automatically. And the same pattern works for monthly close, for KPI dashboards, for budget tracking, and anything else that runs on a fixed schedule. Now, scheduled tasks handle work that needs to run on a regular interval. But there are two other situations finance professionals run into where you also do not want to be the one driving the process every time. Live artifacts. Let's start with live artifacts. This is where you create outputs that stay automatically updated using connected data sources instead of being generated once like a normal response. So when your data changes, the artifact refreshes itself. So let's say you have a cash position view, a KPI summary, or maybe a metric tracker that you want to keep checking throughout the month. So instead of going back into Claude every time and asking for the same numbers, you set up a live artifact once and it stays up to date in the background. Dispatch. Dispatch is where Claude executes a task in the background while you focus on other work. So instead of sitting in front of your screen, guiding every single step, you give Claude a clear instruction like analyzing a file or preparing a summary or generating a report. Claude starts running that task on your computer, and you can then step away from it and then check the progress or review the results from your phone. Now, it's important to understand that this is not direct control of your PC from your phone. Claude runs the task on your system and you can just monitor it remotely. Now, in practice, this is useful when you start a task that takes a few minutes to run, like reviewing a cash flow file or preparing a CFO summary, and you do not want to wait at your desk for it to finish. You start the task, you walk away, and the result waits for you when you come back. Now, the execution happens on your machine and you check it from wherever you are. Connectors. Everything we have covered up to this point assumes one thing, and that is that you are uploading the data into Claude every time, either directly or through a project folder. So the next layer removes that assumption entirely. So instead of moving files around, Claude can read directly from the systems where your finance data already lives, and that is what connectors do. And you find them inside Customize on the sidebar. Now I click on Customize and Connectors in the first option, because without connectors you're constantly downloading and uploading, which is slow and means you're usually working off stale data. But with connectors, Claude reads from the source. So to add one, I click the plus icon, then browse connectors, and you can see the list of things like Snowflake and BigQuery for data warehouses, Databricks for larger data sets, Airtable for structured operational data, plus communication tools like Gmail and Microsoft 365. For this walkthrough even, I'm going to use Airtable because most finance teams have some kind of internal data set, database even for transactions and budgets or trackers, and Airtable is the most common one. So I search for it, I click connect and then authenticate with my account. Now once it is connected, Claude can read tables, records and schemas directly from Airtable, and depending on the permissions that you allow, it can also write back, maybe update reconciliation status or flag entries. So the next time you ask Claude to summarize transactions or review a monthly trend, it pulls the live data instead of asking you for a file. Plugins. So connectors handle the data side. Claude is now reading from your live systems, but the next thing to extend is what Claude can actually do with that data. And that is where plugins come in. So connectors give Claude access to your data systems, but plugins adds pre-built tools to Claude itself, designed for specific types of work. So still inside Customize, I click the plus icon to add a plugin, and then I select Browse Plugins. Now the one I'm installing here is the Finance plugin, which is built specifically for finance and accounting work like financial statements or variance analysis or SOX testing and many other things. I click install, and from that point, every one of those workflows is available across my projects and chats. But what makes the plugin actually powerful is what's inside it, which are the skills. Now, skills are where Claude shifts from being a general assistant into something that follows structured, role-specific finance workflows. So each skill is a complete process that mirrors how finance teams actually operate, with predefined inputs, logic, validation, and output format. So when I open the Manage panel of the Finance plugin and I click into skills, every box you see in there is a complete finance process that Claude already knows how to run. Now, the reason skills change how you work is basically consistency. If you rely only on prompts, then the quality of the output depends on how well you ask the question every single time. But with skills, the structure is already built in. So when you invoke the reconciliation skill, Claude does not need to be told what a reconciliation looks like. It already knows to match transactions, to classify differences into timing items, adjustments and investigation items, and to produce a structured output that ties balances together. So you stop explaining that process and you just start executing it. So that is the real shift from prompting Claude every single time to using Claude as a system that already knows how the work should be done. Claude in Excel. Everything we have covered so far runs inside the Claude Desktop app, but a lot of finance work happens in Excel itself, and you do not always want to leave the spreadsheet to ask Claude something. So Claude in Excel solves that by putting the same capability directly inside the workbook. Now, once installed, you open any Excel file and click into the Claude add-in panel. And from there, you can talk to Claude about the file that you have open. It reads the sheets, the columns, the formulas, and the data. And you can ask it to validate calculations, to maybe restructure a tab, or generate journal entries from a list of items, or to build a variance summary even, or maybe flag inconsistencies. Anything that you would normally do manually inside the workbook, Claude can now do alongside you. Now, for finance work, the reason this layer is important comes down to validation. Now, you do not trust an output blindly just because Claude generated it. You open the file, you check it, you challenge the numbers. Now, Claude in Excel lets you do that review with Claude as a second pair of eyes, recalculating, restructuring, and finalizing the workbook before it goes to a reviewer. That is the layer between systems output and a sign-off ready file. So now we have basically covered every layer. Let me show you what it looks like when you actually use them all together. Real reconciliation. Let's say a manager has asked me to reconcile our utility cash account for March against the corrected data sitting in our company system. So the GL file is in my finance demo folder, the corrected data is in Airtable, and the output needs to be a clean reconciliation file. So this single task is going to use the project, the Airtable connector, the reconciliation skill, and Claude in Excel, all in one single run. So I start a new task, I click work in a project, select my finance demo folder, and then confirm access. And on the right side, I select the model. Now, Opus for complex analysis, Sonnet for regular daily work, Haiku for quick, simple responses. Now I'm working through a real reconciliation here, so I go with Opus. Then I write a single prompt, /reconciliation to invoke the skill, then a clear instruction. The reason this prompt works is the specificity. /reconciliation triggers the skill so Claude follows the proper workflow. Naming Airtable explicitly stops Claude from guessing the data source or running a web search. And asking for a structured Excel file means the output is something that I can hand to a reviewer instead of text just sitting on a screen. Claude runs the full reconciliation. It pulls the Airtable data through the connector, reads the GL file from the project folder, matches transactions, calculates the net cash movement on both sides, identifies the difference, and then it classifies every reconciling item. Now, timing differences get flagged as cutoff issues with no adjustment needed. Adjustments cover bank fees and amount mismatches that require journal entries, and the investigation category catches the most important items like revenue entries posted to cash without matching bank deposits, which is a classification issue that needs follow-up before close. Now, the output Excel file has separate tabs for the summary, the bank reconciliation, matched transactions, timing differences, adjustments, the investigation items, and the underlying GL and bank detail. Everything ties back to source, so any reviewer can trace a number all the way through. Now, this is where Claude in Excel comes in. So I open the reconciliation file, I click into the add in and run a validation prompt asking Claude to review the workbook in full, check whether the adjusted GL balance matches the bank balance, flag any inconsistencies, and produce a cleaned and finalized version. Now, Claude rebuilds the summary tab where the original logic was off, generates structured journal entries for adjustment items, and isolates unresolved differences into a dedicated open items tab with proper documentation. Now, that second pass is what turns a system output into something that you can actually sign off on. So you've now seen the desktop, you've seen the pricing plans, you've seen the 3 core modes of chat, code, and Cowork, and then the 8 layers that sit on top: projects, schedule tasks, live artifacts, dispatch, connectors, plugins, skills, and Claude in Excel. And that really is everything a finance professional needs to know to actually use Claude for real work. Now, the way to actually start is pretty simple. You open chat and work on improving how you prompt with real finance data sets, because every other layer builds on that foundation. Now then, you want to create one project around a workflow that you already do every single month, like maybe reporting or reconciliation. And once that is running clearly, then you schedule it. Then you connect the data source. You install the finance plugin and let the skills do the heavy lifting. You do not need to use everything all at once. You want to just build the foundation first and then the rest of the layers on top of it. Now remember, if you want the prompts or the project setup and the data sets from this video, everything is in my free community, which is linked in the description below. And that's it for now. I'll see you next time.